DCM works. I'm here to set the record straight. Hey guys, David here. Once again, I always do my best to try and keep these brief, but that never happens. It's a nice aspiration though. I'm working towards it. So I just got back from Melbourne, which is where this interview takes place. It's with Gabriel Bergmoser, dear friend of mine and amazing artist, creator, and writer. You can find him at Movie Maintenance from the Sans Pants Radio Guys, that podcast over there. Or if you want to order his book, which is what we end up discussing for most of this podcast, Boone, Shepard, you can at bellfrogbooks.com, and you can grab the ebook, or you can get a hard copy mailed to you. And I believe there will be a distribution list of the bookstores where you can actually grab that will be posted up there soon as well. I really enjoyed this interview. I had a great time in Melbourne, and I wanted to say a big thank you to Gabe for his hospitality, and a big shout out to April for doing an amazing job with the book launch, and everyone who was there. And yeah, I felt like I was yelling, but I hope you guys really enjoy this one. We had a ball putting it together, so without further ado, here is Gabriel Bergmoser and myself talking about Boone Shepard. And a quick warning, this does contain spoilers for the book. I will put in timestamps for when those spoilers occur, but just so you're aware, if you haven't read it, this may contain some spoilers, so enjoy.
This is Christopher Walken, here to warn you that this contains some explicitly foul language, and if you don't like that, then I'll put my foot in your throat.
The soundtrack's amazing. Yeah. The visuals are very, well done. And, the gameplay is super fun. And, because those three things are there, it's exceptionally good.
I could do it in a heartbeat and make millions, but it would feel like just gouging my soul out.
Yeah. Jurassic Park's a little more like DDR.
If Shrek is a fairy tale creature, can he actually own land and want to kick them off? Where did that come from? You have to make a lot of shit up to make good art.
Yeah.
That's just the truth of it. Hey guys, my name is David. Wow, that's not even how I start the podcast. Solid start. It's been that kind of a day. I'm joined by returning guest Gabe Bergmoser.
Hey, great to be back.
And now famous published author and rock star.
Well, not any of those things.
Well,
really. Apart from the published
at
author
least the
part.
published author thing.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
The rest of it's aspirational.
Exactly. It's fake it till you make it, man.
Aim high. That's what I say.
That's it. That would be exactly what I keep doing.
So Boone Shepard. It's
Boone
out.
Shepard.
I've read it.
It's
a book, and it's fun, and it's exciting. So we're going to talk a bit about that, some other stuff that I've got on the cards. But I just kind of wanted to get an idea of where your headspace has been at today.
Oh man, well,
aside from tired, because we were out pretty late last night.
Yeah, look, the book launch was great. I think overall I was just really stoked with how it all worked out. I mean, you sort of, I think the thing is, you see on Facebook events, you've got a certain number of people saying they're coming. You're like, okay, maybe a quarter of those people will turn up. Mm-hmm. But then, the venue was packed out.
Yeah, there was no room.
Yeah, no, and it was great. It was, I was a bit nervous going in, and I think it's funny because my background is in being on stage, and I don't really act anymore. So it's funny nowadays, whenever I have to sort of get up for things like this, I get really terrible stage fright. And it's funny, I've forgotten that I'm actually quite good at public speaking, and I have no problem being in front of an audience.
Yeah.
And I forget it until I'm up there, and I'm like, oh wait, that's right. No, I know.
And then it's just natural.
I'm fine. It's totally okay. But
I think that's normal.
Yeah, I think so.
It's not unusual.
But yeah, I was terrified until I sort of got up, and then it was all fine. And then we kept it brief, and the book launch happened, and now, yeah, I don't know. Today's been really interesting. I sort of had a chat to the publisher this morning, and she told me that her young cousin, who got a copy of the book last week, has already read it twice.
Oh wow,
he's
okay.
10, so that bodes well.
Hey, that's good. Yeah,
I think.
I hope.
I hope so.
That or it's that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing no matter what way you cut it.
Twice is a lot.
Twice is a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a long book, but I wouldn't read it twice.
I haven't even read it.
Yeah, exactly.
I wrote it, didn't read it.
But yeah, no, so and it was funny because today I think it really started to sink in. I kind of got up this morning and I was looking at all the photos from the book launch, and I was like, oh, I guess I'm a published author. I guess I actually am a real writer.
That happened. That all occurred.
And it was sort of it was weird because it wasn't a big kind of explosive, oh my God, it was oh, no, I guess that thing that I've wanted all my life is actually a thing that is now real.
Yeah, that exists.
Yeah, and it's all these people now. I mean, Boone Shepard is something that I've had in my head for so long, and over the process of writing the 5 books, I didn't really show them to anyone.
Yeah.
So apart from one or two sort of choice people, so it's funny because Boone Shepard's kind of been in my head for a while as this whole, not only just as an idea, but actually as a whole manuscript series saga. And it's all been, it's kind of been sitting there for so long that kind of seeing all these people going home with books last night. And I'm like, oh, they're going to read it. It's actually going out in the world. People are going to sort of see what I've been, for better or worse, people are going to see what I've been hunched over my laptop smashing out for so long. So,
do you get that feeling? This is something that I get whenever we do scripts. Is sort of you kind of trust them. You kind of trust the ownership to everyone when you release it. You kind of go, this is no longer just my thing. This is now a shared thing.
There's definitely a bit of that. And I had this really funny kind of moment the night before the book launch when I was at home and I was kind of like, bumming around. Game of Thrones had just come out, and I was going to watch the new episode. I kind of had it ready to go, and then suddenly I just had this feeling of like, oh, well, tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be a published author, and Boone Shepard's going to be in the world, and people are going to, like, money will change hands
for my good that I've produced.
I guess is a product now, not just sort of a selection of scribbling saved on my computer. So actually, I put on my blog, I actually wrote, this, it sounds so fucking corny, but I actually wrote a letter to Boone. Like, just to say, like, I mean, you've been mine for so long, but now you're not. And I suppose, like, whenever I do a play, the way I think about it is, and it's always funny because actors in plays, they come to you and they're like, oh, what do you think the character would do and stuff like that? And I'm like, I don't fucking know. You've spent more time with this than I have.
Yeah.
Like, the fact is, you have spent more time with that character. It takes me a couple of weeks to write a play, like you spend months in rehearsal development. By the time play goes on, the actors know the character better than you do. The directors know the material better than you do. They pick up on subtext that was not intentional. And so the way I've always seen it is that in the process of writing a play, it belongs to you. In the process of rehearsals, it belongs to the director.
Sure.
In the process of performance, it belongs to the actors, and everything after that belongs to the audience.
Yeah.
And in kind of the same way, I guess now this is new territory for me, but like kind of the same way with a book, like in the process of writing, it was mine. In the process of editing and publishing, it was the publisher's. And now
suddenly it's everyone's.
Belongs to everyone else.
Yeah.
And I guess like all I can do is kind of sit here and there's nothing I can change. There's nothing I can tweak. There's nothing I can do. It's out there in the world, flaws and all,
How did you know it was done? Because that's a question I get a lot. People are like, how do you know when a manuscript is finished?
I don't.
That's
I mean, I don't. I mean,
that.
if I'm happy with it, that's about the best I can hope for. And I mean, look, I'm not really a perfectionist. Like, there's that cliche of sort of the perfectionist writer. I've never really been like that. Like, for me, if I finish a manuscript, I read over it and I'm like, yeah, you know what? Good. Like, there are a couple of things I've changed here and there. There are a couple of things that probably need work. But I mean, like with Boone Shepard, it was one of those things where I finished the first book and it was different doing the second book because the second book was one where I finished it and I was like, that is a total mess that is going to require so much work.
Yep, I know that one.
But
that feeling.
But with the first, the third, and the fourth, they're all books where I finished them, I read over them, and I was like, you know what? More or less, that's pretty much what I was going for. Yeah. Like, the intention I had in that book has been realized, and any of the stuff that needs to be fixed will be fixed in the editing process.
Yeah.
And so, there was plenty of stuff that was rewritten and tweaked and fixed up during the process of editing and all of that. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the moment it was done was the moment it was bound and put into my hands.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, that's fair enough.
I guess
that's probably that's a good way of thinking about it.
Really, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't know. I always had this mentality of like sometimes books are better, and sometimes it's generally true of most art. Sometimes it's better when it's not completely perfect and it has some rough edges here and there.
Well, have you ever read a book called Maestro by Peter Goldsworthy?
I haven't, no.
It was a class text that I had to study in year 11, I think, for literature. And of course, like all class texts, I think there's a certain stigma that comes with them. And, you'll never read them again. You'll never look at them again. You can't enjoy them again. It takes away
all the joy.
Because, you've had to study them and it's taken away all the joy before, you get to a point where you actually, like I have, where you actually enjoy studying and analysing stuff. But Maestro it's a little novella, Australian novella, and I read it when I was quite, like, in year 11, so I would have been maybe 16, 17, and it was a book that really stuck with me because of what it kind of said about art. And retrospectively, the themes were quite on the nose in that the themes are just directly stated in the text.
Yeah.
But pretty much it's about a kid who wants to learn piano. He learns piano with this eccentric old Viennese World War II survivor.
Your mentor character.
Holocaust survivor or something, I don't quite remember.
Sure.
And basically, he spends all his life striving for perfection. Like, nothing's ever good enough. And he's always trying to get his music technically perfect. And in the end, what he kind of takes away from it is he goes, yeah, I've become technically perfect, but technical perfection has no heart.
Yeah.
Has no art. Like, it's better to have something that is beautiful and messy and has a lot of heart and a lot of feeling and a lot of emotion in it, but has flaws, than it is to have something that is technically perfect, but actually soulless.
But it has, yeah, I mean, because people are like that. You know?
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
where these weird, messy things.
My favorite book in the world is so flawed. Like, my all-time favorite book is a book where I read over it, and I'm just like, man, it is just... It's you read it, and like the female characters are terribly sketched.
Yep.
All of them kind of just exist for the main character to kind of drool over and then inevitably have sex with. Some of
Yep.
the plot points and twists that happen in the book are just ridiculous. Like, it's quite a down-to-earth book, but there are these moments where it's like, what the fuck? Some of the villain characters are so broadly drawn, which is it's really at odds with some of the other characters who are like actually quite beautifully sort of put together.
Yeah, they're rendered in
Exactly,
detail.
but then some of the villainous characters, like, nobody in the world is this villainous.
Yes.
And also, like, you know, a lot of the dialogue, like, characters who are not meant to be intelligent or educated or anything come out with the wittiest, most, like, profound, verbose things.
They start sounding like
And
Oscar Wilde or
all
something.
of that is stuff that I read and I'm like, that's... But the fact is, every time I read that book, and last time I read it was last Christmas, I cry like a baby.
Yeah?
Every time, because what it's about and what it sort of says to me still always hits me so hard, and that is worth so much more than any like
I totally
technical
agree.
flaws that kind of film school or uni would advise you against, you know?
And I think there's a real lack of that conversation that happens in the professional sphere of writing, at least from sort of, particularly for people who are learning to write. They're in university, they're in these degrees. Those conversations aren't had because you know you're being assessed on your writing instead of. I think it's quite a weird thing to sort of assess someone's writing because. You know, when you learn to write, and when I say I learn to write, I don't mean like when you're a kid, I mean when you're an adult and you're actually, you know, becoming a novelist or whatever it is that you're doing. Learning to write is about writing.
Yeah,
you know,
that's it. That's the only way to do it.
You write and you write and you write until you write well.
And look, the thing is, like, I still remember so distinctly this uni class I did. I think it was the first playwriting class I did when I was at Melbourne Uni. And the tutor put down in front of us a play by Samuel Beckett, who wrote Waiting for Godot.
Yep.
And I hate Samuel Beckett. I really do not like
Yeah.
Samuel Beckett. I find absurdism... I don't get absurdism. I would rather just be told a story. And so, you know, she put this out in front of us and she was like, okay, writing exercise. Every week, writing exercise. Write like this, write like this. And she would give us text to imitate.
Oh,
and they
okay.
were always Samuel Beckett. And eventually... I'm like, look, I'm not in those circumstances. I'm not that outspoken a person. I'd rather sit at the back and not say anything and do my own thing.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, it got so frustrating. I had to put up my hand and be like, so basically you just want us to imitate Samuel Beckett. And she was like, oh, well, this is what good writing is. And I was like, but what if that's not what I want to write? Because it wasn't. And she was like, but this is what good writing is. And I was like, but it's not the only form of good writing.
It doesn't work like that.
And what was so refreshing when I got to Victorian College of the Arts was that they said, okay, we want to know what you want to write.
Yeah.
We're going to take what you want to write and the stuff you want to create and your voice, and we're going to teach you how to make that better. We're going to teach you how to hone it and learn things like structure, learn things like how to get your themes nice and clear, learn all of that stuff. And it made all the difference because it wasn't about trying to enforce a style or a way of doing things on you.
Like a rubric.
Exactly.
You know?
It was like, it's different for everyone. Everyone has a different approach. Everyone who is a serious writer and who works it long enough has their own voice and their own style and their own, I guess, if you want to be cheesy about it, kind of soul they have to bring to it.
Well, no,
and it was all
I
about
think-
taking that and just
Yeah.
honing it and learning how to bring that out.
I don't think that's cheesy necessarily. I think a good metaphor that someone once told me is writing a book is like building a house. There are a whole bunch of elements you have to do. Like you have to do walls, you have to do foundations, you have to do plumbing, electricity, or whatever. And when you're first learning to write, you might be really good at putting up the walls. Like you're an amazing carpenter, you put up really good walls, but you don't know plumbing, so your plumbing is terrible. And then several years later, you learn how to plumb well, and then you learn how to do electricity.
It's funny you should say that because I've got them sort of in my head. I've got kind of, I think it's 5 distinct stories of mine. Like I think of my writing life as it has progressed in phases.
Sure.
Like there was sort of my initial phase when I wrote my first novel when I was 13 and what came after that. And then there was something I wrote at a certain point, maybe about a year and a half or 2 years after that, that was a really, really clear shift.
Okay.
So when I finished this work, suddenly it was like, oh no, now I've actually learned something new. Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing was just writing whatever came to my head and like trying to write stories. And the first major shift was when I was like, this is actually how I write about things that are meaningful to me.
Yes.
And then the next shift I had after that was, this is actually how I write character. And the next shift after that was, this is how I write dialogue that actually has its own style and cadence to it. And I think and then it was like, this is how I actually make my prose pretty strong, and so on and so forth.
No,
And so
yeah,
can
I
actually
completely- I get what you
pinpoint
mean.
The works that have made those shifts for me, and like they weren't necessarily the best stories I've ever written, but they were really pivotal in teaching me certain things that I now try to kind of bring to the table with everything I write.
I get exactly what you mean. I think, going back to that idea of that teacher and the way that she was approaching it, she was basically saying to you, even though that you're in your head, you're building a house that looks the way that you want a house to be built. She's like, yeah, but do the walls like Beckett did. And you're like, but they won't fit. And she's like, no, but do the walls.
Exactly.
And you're like,
Exactly.
but it won't fit. Like, the house won't work. And then you get a weird house at the end that doesn't make any sense. So I think there is a time and a place to learn how to imitate other styles. And I think everyone starts off writing imitating.
I think so, but
When
I
you're
don't.
younger,
I really like take a lot of. I mean, I get it to a degree because it's a university course. Most people there are doing it just as an elective for fun. Most people in those creative writing classes at uni are not going to go out and become writers.
Or if that's their intention, they've not written much before.
Yeah, and so I get it. It was frustrating to me because I think, and I said this in the last interview we did, that like the fact was I was never good at anything else, so there was really no choice for me but to become a writer.
Yeah.
So what was always frustrating for me was the fact that by the time I started doing those courses, it was still very much a work in progress, but I had started to develop my own voice and my own things I wanted to write about, my own concerns and everything. And it was so frustrating because I came to these classes and instead of saying, hey, let's take what you've already got and teach you how to develop that better, it was saying, no, we're going to tell you how to do things. And the difference for me with VCA was we're going to give you the tools to build the walls in the house.
Yeah, they give you the utility belts.
Exactly. Not tell you what kind of walls your house has to have.
And that's as well. It's like a hammer and nail problem. They're like, hey, they view writing as a problem.
Yeah,
it's a problem to be solved. Where,
I mean, it is, but only in the editing process.
Yes, but
I mean, sometimes in the writing process. But I mean, you gotta have fun while you're doing it.
But the editing is when you paint the house and you add the garden beds and you pave the driveway. Like, it's the touches on the end that make it into a house, not just a building.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's sort of
absolutely.
and I don't know. I like that metaphor a lot because I think for people that they're not necessarily creative, that that's not what they do professionally. It's really hard to kind of talk about these abstract things that.
Oh yeah,
For writing, because for writers, like we have an immediate dialogue because we've been doing this for years. Like,
we know, and yeah.
And so then someone will ask me like, oh, well, what kind of stuff do you write? And a classic writing sort of someone who hasn't written for very long, or if they have, they're sort of still learning. They'll kind of hesitate and they'll preface everything. I don't know if you've noticed this, but you're like, okay, so what do you write? And they'll go, oh, well, it's kind of it's not really sci-fi, but it's kind of sci-fi. Like they'll do this sort of.
But I actually think everybody does that when a story's still in progress.
It's a defense mechanism.
It is a bit. But like I think when I've only just started a story and I'm still feeling my way through, I'll be like with Boone Shepard, I reckon in the early days with that, it would have been like, it's sort of this and it's sort of this and it's sort of, but because I didn't really know. Whereas now I can tell you at the drop of a hat. It's like, well, actually, somebody gave me the perfect description of it this morning when a friend of mine who'd bought at the book launch, he messaged me and he was about halfway through and he was like, so it's Tintin with attitude.
Yeah, sure.
Why not?
Yeah.
Sure. But like, I mean, my pitches, I'm straight away like, okay, basically it's Tintin meets Doctor Who with the tone of Lemony Snicket.
It's pretty spot on. Yeah.
Pretty much. And it's like, I know that now. I know what my story is now. But it took me ages to get to that point. But I even think like now, I mean, I would consider myself at this point, for my age and where I'm at, relatively accomplished. And I've done quite a lot of writing in my life. But even now, if I'm only just starting a story, I would rather not. It's like at uni where they talk about, you have to know what your controlling idea is, what your theme is, what your sort of story is about.
Yeah.
And I would rather come into a story with less knowledge of that and less understanding of what it is
from the text
and learn. Because I actually think if you go in there with a really constrained idea of what the story has to be, you don't leave as much room for it to organically change and go in better places.
Yeah,
and sometimes you're fighting against where the story wants to go, and you've got to trust the story.
But there's I fundamentally I agree. For me, fundamentally, that is true. Like, you do have to trust your work. But for some people, there's different writers. Like, if you look at someone like Flaubert, who his philosophy was he was a French writer, famous for his control of language. So he believed in le mot juste, which is the just word. So he believed that in every sentence and paragraph there is a way to make it perfect, like language-wise. So he wrote Madame Bovary, which is a story about a housewife in country France who has a bunch of affairs.
Yeah.
It's not a very exciting story. Like, it's not earth-shattering. It's not James Bond, but what he does incredibly well is he's able to manipulate the language in like it's so concise. Like every sentence and paragraph is perfect. Like because I read it in French because I at that time I spoke French fluently.
Sure.
And that was the first time where I realized that the way that I write, because I think it's a personality thing. We write stories. We write about characters and these sort of the passionate things that we can imagine. But this guy had taken. I was so stunned by how he'd taken language that we use and manipulate to create stories, and he went, "What if I could do it perfectly?" And he did, and it turned out to be an amazing book. So I think that's like the flip side of there's that kind of a writer who.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's so different for everyone. I mean, that's the reality of it. Like, I do have a lot of people coming to me and be like, they ask for advice and stuff like that, and it's that. And sorry, that sounds so wankery. It's only started to happen kind of recently.
I know what you mean
with the book and everything.
Well, even people you meet who hear, even if not in the context of like you being in the public face as a writer, even people you meet on writing courses, if you've written more than them, they might come to you and ask for advice and stuff.
It's just a funny situation because, people ask for advice and I'm like, man, what works for me might not work for you. Yeah. Like my friend Sean, who you can hear over on Movie Maintenance, if you listen to it, the Sans Pants radio podcast I'm often on, he's an amazing, brilliant writer. And he comes up with like, some of the stuff of his I've read is just unbelievable. And the ideas he comes up with are just incredible. And he has one of the strongest understandings of structure I've ever seen, which I lack. But Sean, like I've been to his house and that guy, like, see, I just sit down and smash it out. I just sit down and like have a rough idea, have a rough beat sheet of what happens.
Yep.
And I'm like, these are the points I have to hit. They might change, whatever. If they do,
just
that's cool. I'll work with it.
Yep.
And I just start smashing it out and have fun with it and let it go where it needs to go. Whereas Sean, like, I've been around to his place and he had, like, the screenplay he was finishing for the Victorian College Arts Masters, his wall was covered in, like, the 5-act structure journey beats for every single character from major to minor. It was covered in sort of different elements of things that might be seen in his story. And it was like, I could just imagine him sitting there, like, pondering this wall, kind of taking it all in.
Yeah.
And the work this guy does, like, breaking everything down beforehand, but it fucking works. Like, it really pays off in... really, really solid, sort of brilliantly structured, really well-tempered and well-worked stories. Whereas, mine can be a bit more fluffy. My stories can be a lot fluffier, and there's a lot of kind of stuff I have to edit around.
Yeah, it's hard and fast is how I describe your writing.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's different for everyone. So, like, my approach is not his approach, and but it works for both of us in different ways.
Yeah, because I mean, the obvious advice I usually give is write, but for someone like him, that's not true.
Yeah.
So then I go from like, this universal piece of advice that I give people should work for everyone, but it also doesn't. Because for him, it's not right. It's, maybe it's visualized, maybe it's he structures everything first. For other people, it's just, you've just got to get into it. For some people, like someone I used to know, when she wrote, she would sort of spend a really long time on her first draft writing the sentences. So she would, she would, spend a day writing and she'd get a few paragraphs out, but they were like perfect. And she never had to go back and edit because that was how she wrote.
Yeah.
So she'd sit there, she's not sitting there writing and rewriting. She's just thinking about the sentence, turning it over, finding what she wants, and then writing it down. But that would drive me insane. I just need to go, like, I need to be in it,
Look, there's, I suppose you kind of win some, you lose some, really, because, like, somebody who takes a lot of time structuring and working on themes and really meticulously pre-planning might come up with a more kind of immediately solid product.
Yeah.
But someone like me who's very prolific, I have a huge output. I'm putting out heaps of like plays and stories and stuff all the time. But not all of them are good.
No,
not all of them are worthwhile.
It's a step,
because it's just like spilling out. I think the only difference, I actually reckon, apart from obviously I understand my craft a lot more now, but realistically, the only difference I think between now and when I was maybe like 15 is the fact that now I know which stories are good and which ones aren't. Like, I'll still write things where I look at it and it's like, oh man, that's not good.
Yeah.
That's not good at all. What were you doing? You're better than this.
What was I thinking?
Exactly. But like, but now I know. Like, now I would look at that and be like, I'm not ready to show that to anyone. And, that's, I suppose, the key difference. But that's kind of the double-edged sword of being really productive, is that not everything you produce is going to be worthwhile.
But I think that's, the old philosophy is like, when you write, you keep 20%, you throw out 80%.
Oh, yeah.
But if you don't do the 100% of the work, then you're not going to get the 20% of good.
Absolutely.
So, you have to, it's bum and chair, you have to write.
That's it. Well, I mean, I think you just have to sit down, just do it, apply yourself, and what comes out might not be good, but I mean, try to enjoy it while you're doing it, because if you don't enjoy it while you're doing it,
Why are you doing it? There's a moment, I don't know if you get this, you probably do, because we write in similar ways, but there's a moment when I'm in the middle of, if I've sat down to write, whatever the context is, and I'll hit a point where I get into the rhythm, and I just forget that I'm writing, and it just kind of...
Oh, yeah.
Stephen King calls it, you move through the page, and
Yeah,
you inhabit the world.
Well, that was in Misery, and that was a moment where I read that, and I was like, that's what it is.
Because it absolutely is.
We trust Stephen King to sort of put it perfectly into words, what I cannot explain.
Yeah, he's really tapped into his craft, because he's been doing it for so long that he gets every part of it, you know.
And it's true, like, you know, you do sort of fall into it and just let this, I mean, the first warning sign for me that a story isn't right is if I'm not gripped by it.
Yes.
Because if I'm not gripped by a story, how can I expect anyone else to be?
Yeah.
You know?
I wrote a prequel for this series that I've been working on for years now. And I was like, okay, it's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. But I'm not going to, it was the first book we were going to publish, actually. And we were completely ready to go. Like, we'd gone through the processes of everything. And I was looking at the final draft, and I was like, I'm not excited by this. Like, it doesn't excite me.
Yeah.
We'll keep it, and it'll be canon, and maybe we put it out later or whatever. But it doesn't grip me like it needs to.
And yeah, it needs. I mean, it's such a. It does sound kind of arrogant to be like, oh, it's so gripping. But it's like, look, if I sit down and can burn through my own story, because trust me, the flaws that you people are noticing reading my stuff, I'm noticing 100 times more.
Yeah, because
but if something can like grab me and make me want to read more and feel like an easy read to me.
Yeah.
And even more so, like in the writing process, I'm writing it and it's flowing, and I'm like, fuck, I just want to sit down and write the next chapter.
Yeah.
I just want to sit down and write the next thing. I want to spend as much time as possible in this world with these characters.
Yeah.
Chances are it's probably going to be a pretty decent read for the people reading it.
And even if it isn't, you still get that moment of enjoyment.
Absolutely.
And so many people don't get that from what they do for a living.
So just have, like, I mean, I think that's the big thing. It's like being a writer. It's like there's such a cliche about like the tortured artist hunched over the laptop going through endless cigarettes and guzzling scotch and glaring at the computer.
In fairness, we both do that.
Well, yeah, sure, why not? But I'm not. But I don't. But I personally, I have fun when I write.
But I don't think it's not like, a toil. It's this amazing.
It's not a toil. It's like I sit down, I just enjoy it. Like there's nothing I enjoy more than sitting down and just doing non-stop writing.
Just
doing
getting
non-stop writing. Good work, writer.
Those were English words.
Yeah,
10 out of 10.
Poetry in motion.
Well, you're not a poet. You're a
much,
that's that much is obvious. Okay, so switching gears for a minute. Boone Shepard. So I want to do non-spoilers and then spoilers because I got some stuff that I want to talk about.
Awesome.
So, and this isn't a spoiler, but just structurally, the book is split into 3 parts.
Yes.
And part 2 is a flashback, effectively. I hesitate to use the word flashback because I feel like that has connotations. It chronologically occurs before part 1.
Yes. Yes.
And it's not just that it's chronologically different; it's very thematically different.
Absolutely.
From the first part.
Absolutely.
So, without too many spoilers, or without any spoilers, if possible, when you were kind of approaching, like, did the novel begin in that structure? Was that natural?
Okay.
Or how did that come about? Because it's quite unusual.
Yeah, it is unusual, and the way it happens was. Basically, the very, very early drafts of Boone Shepard were written in high school. And originally, I wrote 3 20,000-word stories. And the whole middle section, the flashback section, was a 20,000-word novella in and of itself.
Sure.
And the first and third part of what has become this book were their own novel as well.
Sure.
So what kind of happened was that when I came to writing this one was intended to be the second in the series. So the first one was called The Broken Record. It was sort of a adventure mystery that kind of introduced you to Boone, introduced you to Promethea, introduced you to the world, all of that.
Yeah.
And we ended up scrapping it because the second book kind of got into the meat of the series. And so when I was approaching writing the second book, I was trying to think, how do I incorporate the flashbacks? And at first I thought, do I do flashbacks all kind of through it? And then I thought, what if I just have this section kind of in the middle where we see what happened before? And I actually think the reason I think it works, and it is extremely unusual, but the way I tried to approach it was that 3 parts. The first part opens with a question. And the question basically is, who is Boone Shepard and what is this book? He's trying to hunt down this book that has this mystery in it that he is determined for nobody to find out.
Yep.
What is this mystery? And that's what should be the question in the audience's head as they're reading the first part.
And it is.
So, good. And so as it goes on and he's trying to find this book, he gets given this job where he has to go into the Scottish Highlands and investigate this mystery. And the way I tried to structure that first part, or I guess tried to shape that first part, was that the predominant question in the audience's mind should not have been, what is this mystery he's hunting in Scotland? Because the whole time, Boone doesn't care about the mystery in
his
Scotland.
mind is elsewhere.
He's thinking about the book. He's thinking, I want to get this over and done with so I
Yeah.
go back to what I care about.
Absolutely.
So I deliberately shaped it that way. So in the audience's head, they're not thinking, I can't wait for him to get to Scotland. They're thinking, what's going on with the book?
With
and
the
the
book.
tension is what's actually going on. So when
Yeah.
Promethea confronts him at the end of the first part, lays the book out and says, I've read it, I know what's going on here.
That would count as spoilers, by the way, just if we're...
Okay.
We kind of, well,
Should
okay.
we just dive straight into spoilers? Because I don't think anyone's going to be listening to this if they haven't
No, that's
read
true.
the book.
Okay, fine. We'll do spoilers. Yeah, okay. Sorry. So you were saying.
Okay, so Promethea confronts Boone,
Sure.
puts the book in front of him, sort of says, I've read this, and I think you're a fraud, and I think you've taken your cues from this, and whatever.
Yeah.
And then we flash back.
Yes.
Now, the way I tried to structure the flashback parts, in the original very crappy high school version, we saw a lot more of Boone and Marby's adventures.
Okay.
So we saw, I think it was structured in a way where every chapter was like almost a different short story and a different adventure they went on.
Okay.
And every one was one was Jekyll and Hyde, one was Sweeney Todd, everyone was sort of a different 1800s horror novel being accidentally inspired by their adventures.
Yeah.
When I came to this, it was funny because on the one hand, it was like this flashback sequence is paying off the questions that the audience had in their head in the first part. But at the same time, the audience is going to be keenly aware that this is not the main plot. This is flashback.
Yes.
So you're getting your answers, but this isn't the main plot of the book. This isn't the main
Yeah, it's not
thing that's
it's
going
not the
on.
thrust. It's
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it sort of became this really tricky thing of doing it in this certain way where it was fast-paced enough and it was burning through enough plot, and there's that sort of montage bit in the middle where Boone kind of talks reflectively about everything him and Marby are going through.
Yeah.
Which is sort of like Joel Zammett kind of described, from Sandspants Radio, kind of described it as a montage, and that's sort of how I wanted it to be.
And it
it's
feels
sort
like a
of-
montage.
If it was a movie, it would be a montage of like different clips of Boone and Marby's different adventures to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
from point
yeah.
A to point B.
And it feels. I was trying to think of a way to put, because I was reading it on the train this morning, and I was sort of turning it over my head, and like it feels like a montage, but it's like a thematic montage.
Yeah, that's
know?
kind of exactly what it is. And that was, yeah, that sequence. So basically, the whole point of that was just kind of to get that flashback sequence, I guess, for want of a better word, from point A to point B as quickly as possible, so we could get back into the meat of it.
Yeah.
And obviously, there were still big questions to be answered, and there were still kind of big things going on and everything. But yeah, by the time the flashback stuff wraps up, I think it's just over the halfway point of the book.
Yeah. So
And
it's
then
actually
we
the
kind of-
shortest. It's the shortest Well, actually, I think
The first part's the shortest, yeah.
But the second part feels like, because the first part ends on the question, it feels more like it feels bigger.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what happens? My experience when I was reading the second part is I felt like what it ended up doing is it ended up it just draws your attention back to the question, like the whole time.
Good, which is kind of what I want from it.
And then when you get back to part 3, you're like, oh, okay, now everything's going to happen.
And
again,
then the trick in part 3 was that I was like, okay, so now we're running a risk, because if I've set it up so the audience doesn't care about what's going on in Scotland,
Yeah.
they care about this sort of question of who is Boone.
Then you got to make whatever's
And now
happening
it's like-
in Scotland real impressive.
Exactly. So that's why immediately in the first chapter back
Mm.
after the flashback, I have them captured, I have them taken to Babel, I have them in there straight away. So it's like,
You got
now
bang
the question
answers.
is how they're going to get out of this, what's going on. And then,
Mm.
of course, at the very ends, it all ties together, because everything going on in the 1800s actually does strongly tie in
Which,
with...
I guess realistically, like, if we're talking about structure, the inciting incident is the book, is him going after the book. Like, the inciting incident of the novel, structurally, is him going after the
Yeah.
book, But what that ends up doing is it means that the middle build, the whole thing is, who is he? What
Yeah.
is the book gonna do? And then you get these moments. I don't know if this was your intention, but I felt this like very tactile sensation of periodically throughout the flashback. It felt like initially that Marby she might know something about him. Initially, like that was sort of a just from the dialogue and stuff. There were these little bits where the minute she walks in and she has her eyes wide, and that to me they were really small and subtle.
Yeah, good.
And
I'm
you
glad
go,
you noticed
you
them.
go, is it because he's weird or does she knows? Like, yeah. So I definitely got that impression.
That's so good to hear.
Which, although that being said, I'm reading it as a writer, so
Because that pays off in a really big
Yes,
way
it does.
down the line.
Oh, okay.
In book 3,
Oh,
that has a
all right.
that has huge
Oh, all
connotations.
right. See, now you got me excited. Okay, so that being said, we spoke about this last night, but I thought we'd revisit it now that we've taken a moment and we've breathed. The book is filled with references and literary figures, and as you said, the idea being that sort of Boone would unintentionally inspire all of these famous novels.
Yeah.
Where did that idea come from? Like, how did that form for you?
Honestly,
God, I've just asked a writer where you get your ideas from.
No,
Jesus
I mean,
Christ.
really, it was just it honestly was like kind of a holdover from. And look, this is a holdover, and that element is a holdover from when I wrote the first version when I was 16, because at that time I was really into those gothic horror novels. I loved Dorian Gray, I loved Jekyll and Hyde, I loved Dracula. I was really into that stuff. And I think, and I said this at the book launch, it was a way for me to play in that playground with those characters without getting sued for plagiarism.
Yes.
And also, I mean, look, I am not Boone Shepard. Boone Shepard is not meant to be me.
No, he's not really an analog for you.
No, he's not.
I was saying that Prometheus is more an analog to you than anyone.
I think, look, in some way, I mean, look, every character you're ever going to write has elements of you. And there's definitely a lot of me in Boone, but Boone is not meant to be an an author surrogate.
Sure.
He's not, and I know a lot of authors say, the main character's me. It's like, I don't think Boone Shepard is. Boone Shepard's a character who has a lot of me in him, in the same way Prometheus does, in the same way a lot of other major characters do. But Boone is not me. But as a proxy, it was kind of a fun way to, sort of hang out with Oscar Wilde.
Yeah, spend time with those people.
And there's a bit in the second book which realistically, I can see the editor right now looking at it and being like, that's got to go. Where Boone...
Isn't that a good feeling?
Boone gets... I really like it. It's Boone gets thrown from a flying casino in Las Vegas.
Amazing.
Falls through the sky in the Nevada desert. And his fall is broken by a really big campsite, and he kind of bounces off and survives.
Yep.
And it's Jack Kerouac camping out in the desert, who's gone trekking around.
That's amazing.
And there's this whole scene where Boone and Jack Kerouac just kind of sit by the campfire and they just talk. It's sort of like, if you're going to go screenwriting terms, it's sort of the all is lost moment. It's sort of right before the third act's about to start. And it's Boone being like, there's all his friends are kind of being held captive up there. The bad guys are about to win. And he's kind of sitting there being like, there's no way for me to get back up there. There's no way for me to stop it.
Yep.
And him and Kerouac kind of had this really reflective moment where, because the second book is all about Boone kind of learning to let people into his life.
Yep.
And learning how to be friends with people and learning how to open up and not be a solitary figure. And so his friends are kind of in peril up there on this casino, and it's him kind of reflecting on his friends and talking about them. And then Jack Kerouac kind of has a version of his... I mean, for anyone who's read On the Road, that beautiful part where he talks about how the only people for him are the mad ones.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that sort of reflected back at Boone, and that's kind of what galvanizes him to kind of go back and sort of save his own mad ones.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a whole sequence that was really just an excuse for me to be in a room, well, not in a room,
spend time with them.
in
No,
a
I know what
desert
you mean.
by a
Yeah.
campfire.
No, but I know
with
what you
one of
mean.
my favorite writers,
Which is, I mean, that's such a... it's hard to explain it, because from a craft perspective, that's such a delightful thing to be able to do.
Absolutely. I mean, look, the whole thing with Boone Shepard stuff is, if it delighted me in writing it, then it went in.
And because it shows, that's the thing, when something is written with passion, it shows. It's not a tactile thing. It can't be like, you can tell there's passion in it because of these paragraphs. It's just throughout. You can just sense it.
Again, it's just the process of throwing everything I like into a big pot and just having fun with it. So, I mean, a lot of the names of random side characters are references to things. There's
that's I've noticed that a lot.
Oh yeah, and particularly as the series goes on, there is more and more of that, and there's more and more side characters turning up who are either real people or sort of references to certain things.
Yeah.
And look, it's basically just sort of it's just kind of a chance for me to have fun in all the playgrounds that inspired me. I think is actually how I approach it.
I think it's it's kind of your way of, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's kind of, you're showing ultimate respect for those things that got you to where you are as a writer.
That's kind of what it is. And I mean, look, Boone Shepard isn't, as a series and as a story, I don't want to say I don't find it artistically fulfilling, because I really do. It's not material that really challenges me.
Yeah.
Boone Shepard never really surprised me in the writing process. There were a couple of elements that I was like, that's kind of not how I saw it going, but it went differently. But in the writing process of the whole series, there was never a moment where I was like, oh my God, that's what's happening.
The penny
moments
drops.
where it was like, moments where I was pulling my hair out being like, can I do this?
Yeah.
Because in terms of, look, for young adult literature and children's literature, it's relatively dark, and the stakes are high. I mean, characters die, and they don't come back.
It's pretty intense.
And there's guns, and there's violence, and there's werewolves, and but
it doesn't feel it doesn't feel violent.
Yeah, no, but it actually is, compared to a lot of other sort of young adult literature.
Yeah.
But so to me, it's not a story or a work of mine that I look at and I think, wow, that really took me to some dark places or some interesting places or really challenged me as a writer or an artist. It didn't.
Yeah.
I just really liked doing it.
Yeah.
And it was just something that I really, really enjoyed writing, something that's just really special to me because, again, it's something that probably has a lot of passion and heart in it more so than anything else because it's just all the things I like with two characters guiding you through it who are two characters I care about a tremendous amount and mean a huge, huge amount to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, yeah, I mean, that kind of thing, it really, it shows in the text. So, without any spoilers for any future books, do you have, like, a favorite reference or character that you brought in?
As in external character?
As in a reference to, like, a literary... do you have a
Okay,
favorite?
there's a bit I've just... Because I've been rewriting the second book, sort of in preparation to deliver the manuscript. And I am actually going to spoil it. There's a bit in the second book...
That's fine. All right, I'll just sit here and cop it.
You're probably going to sit here and you can look at me and be like, oh, really, man? Really? And I think it's great.
I'll give you judgy eyes if that happens. Yeah.
There's a bit in the second book which I love. I think it's one of my favorite bits. It's basically where Boone is in 1960s New York, and basically Elvis Presley kidnaps him. To kind of make him basically to kind of not in the like nefarious way as much as kidnapping cannot be nefarious, but kidnaps him basically to get him to do something for him because Elvis and some other people are kind of in trouble. And Boone is really confused by Elvis because as far as Boone's concerned, it's just this, but like basically what it's kind of implied is that Boone gets taken to this like big hall that's just covered in pictures of Elvis. Yeah. There's a big throne and Elvis and he's never named. He's just like, I'm the king. And like he's the king.
Yeah.
And basically what Boone finds out is that like certain famous musicians like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, etc. are being exploited by this evil... I don't want to go into all the details because it's quite complex, but basically the implication is that all these musicians are sort of a society and Elvis is their king.
That's amazing. He's so, like the secret king of
the secret king
that's
of
amazing.
Musicians everywhere.
That's
and so Boone's
good.
kind of facing... Boone has no idea who he is.
Yeah.
And he's like, who's this guy in this... Like, who's this like slightly pudgy, graying, sweaty man in this glittering suit, and all of Elvis's dialogue, and this is what I'm laughing about it now.
Oh no!
All of Elvis's dialogue is just song titles.
Nope. No, so, God.
There's a bit where he's like, now, because Boone's quite suspicious. He's like, now you can't be having any suspicious minds or we're going to end up caught in a trap. And that'll keep us stuck in this halfway hotel. So you better get on your blue suede shoes and go and face up to the devil in disguise. And it's just like,
that's amazing.
As I was writing it, I was laughing my head off because
you were like,
such
I'm the best.
A cheap gag.
It's a great one, though.
It's so dumb.
Oh my God.
But the fun of it was that, of course, Boone has no idea what's going on.
And also, like...
And Elvis doesn't even tweak. It never occurs to Elvis that Boone might not know who he is.
Oh, okay.
Elvis just kind of is acting like Boone's really awestruck.
Yeah.
So he's like, so Elvis is like to Boone, always great to have a fan helping me out. And he's like, I'm not a fan. I don't know who you are.
It's like, what is happening?
So for me, that's a really funny
That's
scene.
amazing.
But
yeah. No, that's up
probably
there.
my favorite.
That's got to be up there.
Yeah.
They did a similar thing. Well, not similar, but they had a character who was Elvis in one of the Fallout games, the Wasteland games. And yeah, he called himself the king, and he had like a gang. He had like a violent gang of like slickers with like their hair.
Awesome. Actually, there's a bit there's another one I really like in the fourth book. Boone meets Alfred Hitchcock, and he has like this clandestine because the fourth book.
Oh God, that's just yeah okay. I mean, for you that would be amazing because I know how much of a Hitchcock fan you are.
I do love me some Hitchcock, but like in the same way, the first one really is based around sort of gothic horror novels. The way the second one is really based around kind of classic rock.
Yeah.
The third one is really based around kind of suspense films.
Yeah.
And so the opening scene is Boone kind of meeting Hitchcock on the banks of the Thames, like to get some information from him.
Uh-huh.
And it's this really ominous kind of, and I actually really loved writing it. It's like lots of like kind of really back and forth witty wordplay between them.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like doing all this stuff, and then basically Hitchcock kind of like makes some really ominous pronouncement and disappears into the fog.
Oh.
And then an army of icy blondes, because we all know how much Hitchcock loved his icy blondes.
Yep.
So an army of like basically tippy hedrons with their like perfectly coiffed hair with machine guns like come out and start shooting at Boone.
Oh my
and
God.
So it's Boone like having this chase scene with all these like Hitchcock blondes.
That's
coming
amazing.
Out, and it's just totally ludicrous.
Yeah,
and
just
like the
insane.
thing is, because obviously it's a kids' book, kids aren't going to get these references, but to kids they're just colourful characters and fun things that are happening. And if you get the reference, or like if your parents are reading it to you, they'll be like, oh, that's what it is. And maybe it kind of works as a gateway. Maybe it'll introduce them. I don't know. But
I mean,
I'm hoping
hope
it'll
so.
just be fun.
Even if not that, if you read it as a young person and you come back to it years later with the wealth of being,
Exactly. Well,
you're like, oh, that's what that.
It's like reading the Lemony Snicket books, which look, his references are a lot more oblique than mine. Mine are very on the nose.
His books
like,
are a lot
literally
more
just
oblique
is,
as well.
Yeah. Well, the Lemony, like in mine, it literally just is Oscar Wilde. It literally just is Elvis. In the
Yeah.
Lemony Snicket books, they're full of references to all kinds of things. and they're just threaded like really beautifully and subtly throughout the text. And as a kid, you don't notice it.
Yeah.
As an adult, you really pick up on it.
I mean, it's
and
the,
you read through and you're like, oh, that's a George Orwell reference. Oh, that's a
yeah, that's sort of, but because they're so laden that you miss them as a kid.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think it's called the Simpsons effect. I can't remember, but yeah, it's that idea of like, if you reference something for one audience, so like, it's like if you watch Toy Story as an adult,
Yeah, exactly.
it's full of dick
Which
jokes.
I did the other night.
Yeah, it's very funny as an adult.
Yeah,
You're like,
oh, yeah.
You're like, oh, they're banging.
But that's
Those
what
two toys are
Pixar's
banging.
so good at.
Because it means the parents enjoy it as well. 'Cause
Yeah,
what you need.
which I think is a really, really good way to approach entertainment, personally.
Which, I mean, for Boone, like, it meant that when I read it, I wasn't like, oh, this is a book for children. I was like, oh, this is really fun, because I get all
Awesome.
the references,
That's exactly kind of what I want.
which, I mean, as an adult, like, it just was, I was like, okay, I'll just take a break and read some Boone. Like, I just
Yeah.
was like, I'll take a break. This is taking a break.
That's what it's meant to be, and that's why the pace is so frenetic. I didn't want there to be any filler. I want it to be the kind of thing you can knock over in 2 days or 1 day even. I want it to be the kind of thing where you pick it up and it doesn't let up.
Yeah.
It from start to finish, and the whole series is like that. Like the second book literally picks up. The first book ends on a cliffhanger. The second book picks up from that cliffhanger and just barrels on plot wise. And as the books go on, particularly the second and the third, have some real moments of like introspection and some really kind of deeper, heartfelt moments in there. And so I hope the balance kind of works, but we'll sort of see how it goes.
I guess, it tends to be a case of like, I mean, look, just sort of thinking about your dialogue and the way that you kind of tend to structure the conversations. I think it feels quite frenetic some of the time because there's not a ton of exposition. There's a lot of dialogue.
Yeah, sure.
But it means that because there's so much dialogue, what tends to happen is there are little moments where they really just like they sit with you. Like there's a few points in the book I could list off the top of my head where I remember like I really enjoyed that particular part of that conversation.
Yeah, cool. Good.
I mean the biggest one for me is when Marbia and Boone are first on the boat, and they have their first real conversation, and it's just really lovely. Like it's so lovely, and I sat there and I was reading, and I'm like, that was just really nice. Like, and I think from like a craft perspective, it's just like I breathed a sigh of relief. I was like, that was so pleasant.
And it's also the first moment of any like gentle positivity. Not only has Boone had in the 1800s, but in the book
in general,
because Boone and
he's
Prometheus are so barbed with each other.
Yeah, him and Huxley
are barbs. Him and Oscar Wilde are barbs.
Yeah,
every other character is a villain who's trying to kill them. But that moment between him and Marbia is the first time he actually gets.
There's any connection, really.
There's any connection where somebody actually looks beyond him and actually says, I think you have value.
Yeah.
And it's the first time he gets told that. And that's why, and I love that beautiful illustration Joe Lombard did at the head of the chapter of the two of them looking out over the sunset.
Yeah.
Like, I love that.
It's gorgeous.
Picture.
That's such a moment. Like, that's one of those things where people are like, oh, well, what was your favorite part of the book? If that was a question, I'd be like, that.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it wouldn't be if the rest of the book was like that. But because it's this fast-paced, frenetic, like, Indiana Jones, Tintin, like, adventure.
Yeah.
Those moments just, like, it makes them shine more. It makes everything else shine more through,
Absolutely,
like, contrast.
absolutely.
And that was definitely my favorite part. But so stuff like that, you have a very sort of... Some people really struggle with dialogue, and I don't know if that's just like a thing, because a lot of people aren't really taught dialogue very well, just, in writing class and stuff. But you seem to have very clean dialogue, and I know that that's largely editing, and you've worked at it a lot. But when you come into writing a conversation for dialogue, how do you structure how that flows? Do you just kind of get into the characters' voices and just go?
No, not really. Predominantly because I just really enjoy writing dialogue.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm a playwright. And,
Yeah.
the fact is, I'm first and foremost a playwright, and so I just really like writing banter, and I really like just writing characters bouncing back and forth dialogue to each other. So, I mean, there are some of the Boone Shepard books, particularly reading over the later books, where there are moments where I'm like, oh, there's so much conversation that's going to have to go, because there's, particularly obviously, as we're assuming if you're listening to this, you've read the book or you don't care.
Well, we've got through a lot of spoilers, so
We
let's
have,
hope so.
it's too late now. So obviously the book ends with Boone and Prometheus stuck in the 1800s. The second book picks up with the two of them in America living with Oscar Wilde. And it's basically, I think it's referred to by, because Oscar Wilde was in America at that time, historically. And so they're living in this tiny little apartment that's too small for one person with Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
And it's just horrible. I think there's a line where Prometheus calls it like the worst house share ever. Because basically, you've got Boone who's kind of still brooding about what's just happened.
Yeah.
You've got Prometheus who just does not care about anything. She's set up a hammock. She's in there. She's reading Oscar's like drafts of plays and tearing them to shreds and like telling him he's talentless and abusing him and making him cook them breakfast every morning. Oscar's slowly losing it because these like uncultured boars are in his house.
We've all had had
And-
house shares like that.
Oh yeah, and then of course what happens is that adventure comes calling, and they all get sort of pulled out in this new adventure.
Yeah.
But by circumstance, Oscar gets stuck with them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of scenes of the three of them in a carriage, kind of escaping from bad guys across the American countryside in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And there's so much just banter between Boone and Oscar and Promethea, particularly
Yeah.
between Oscar and Promethea. And the fun of it was putting two characters like that, like Oscar Wilde, who's very cultured and very sophisticated and very intelligent,
Yeah.
and Promethea Peters, who is just a loudmouth bore and a really, really immature person to boot.
She's just kind of this bull in a china shop
Exactly.
of a human,
Exactly.
you
And
know?
it's her and Oscar Wilde in a carriage.
That's amazing.
Just ripping into each other. And there's so much superfluous dialogue that's going to have to go. But it was just so much fun to write.
Well, that's what...
Because-
to be honest, that's what Oscar Wilde did really well as well.
Yeah,
which is,
absolutely.
like, awesome that came through, because that's, like, that was his style.
Like,
you know...
yeah, you have these, like, there's one moment, I was just reading over this yesterday, which is why it's so fresh in my head. There's one
Mm.
moment, they're in the carriage and they're bickering, and Boone's just trying to admire the view. And Oscar and Promethea are just, like, bickering back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And Oscar's like, I wish I wasn't traveling with such an uncultured Philistine. And Promethea's like, you're lucky I don't know what that word means, Wilde, or else I'd be punching you.
That's
and I think
amazing.
Oscar says something like, the outcome of a situation cannot be deemed lucky if it is certain.
Oh,
and then Promethea's
snap!
like sitting there, and she kind of like sits there for a moment. And there's
She's,
Boone,
like, working it
and,
out.
Yeah, and Boone's kind of got this moment where his internal monologue is like, "I enjoyed a moment of blessed silence while Promethea tried to work out if Oscar was insulting her or not. He was." And then, like, of
That's
course, then
amazing.
something cuts them off, and Promethea
Yeah.
never gets a chance to figure out if. But it's stuff like that. So
That's
it was really, really fun.
That's like they do that a lot in The Office, the original one, not the American one, where like someone will be like, "Oh, I'll go and I'll do this task," and the narrator will go, "He didn't." It's that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like, it's just so satisfying
or like
when it
Arrested
works.
Development did it too.
Yeah, oh, that perfect example.
Oh, yeah,
where it's
yeah,
like, mom said that she always really loved pies. She did. She lied.
exactly.
Well, she's like, yeah, she said she was gonna go lie down. She lied. Like,
Or
those are the best
cutaways,
moments.
It's that bit moment, or that great moment where she's like, "I love all my children equally," and it cuts to her with a glass of wine, it's being like, "I don't care for Job."
It's
Which I just love
so
so
good.
much.
Stuff like that is so, like, it's just fun.
Yeah,
And I feel like,
really like it.
there's this sort of, because I've studied a lot of Oscar Wilde, because I really admire the
Yeah,
way he
sure.
does what he does. And there's the conversation that, in Ernest, in Points of Being Ernest, at the start with Algernon and the cucumber sandwiches.
Yep.
And that was the first thing of his I ever read, and I just was in.
I remember reading
The minute that
Importance of Being
happens.
Earnest in year 11, incidentally. Funnily enough, it might have influenced this. It did. But I remember studying it in year 11 and just being so taken aback by it, because I picked it up and I started reading it and I had to study it for school.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is really funny.
It's hilarious.
So this is,
like,
and it's still...
it's
and
laugh out loud
humor
funny.
dates. Humor really dates.
Yeah.
But that doesn't.
rock solid.
It's so funny and it's so clever.
Yeah.
And it's just every time I read it, I'm just, in hysterics all the way through.
There's a few moments, and I think this is true of. I think Will Anderson said it. He's like, really good comedy. You like comedy that is so good it's genius. You don't always laugh at. You kind of go, oh my god, I wish I thought of that.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
there's
that's so true.
most of that book, most of that script is you're laughing out loud. And there are a few moments where you go, like, oh my god, that is so genius.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
That I adore that script. I think it's amazing.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's just fantastic.
It's hilarious, and it's got this kind of meaning behind it that's great, and there's so many great
I
characters.
think that's why the picture of Dorian Gray is so good as well, because I mean, I love Dorian Gray because A, it's a cracking yarn. B, it's got so much subtext.
Yeah.
And C, it's actually really funny.
Oh, it's very.
Like, people don't
yeah.
give it credit enough because it was written by Oscar Wilde, so particularly Lord Henry Wotton's lines, a lot of his dialogue is just laugh out loud hilarious.
But I think people get sold short on Dorian Gray because I think when you explain the concept to people, they think it's going to be this dreary, drab Gothic thing.
Nah, Dorian Gray's pretty. It really. I mean, it's not a big book, and it really just kind of starts, and then it jumps 20 years, then it ends.
Yeah, it's
Like,
it's very Oscar. Like,
Yeah, it just kind of includes the highlights, and that's it. And it's very funny, and like
it's a highlight reel. I'd never thought of it like
yeah,
that. Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I love it. I love the picture of Dorian Gray, and the fact that like just as a funny aside, the fact that there's just so much gay subtext in that book,
A lot,
and the
yeah.
fact that he got away with it until obviously they use it in his trial.
And then
But
they were like,
it's
prison.
yeah, well, I mean, it's the same way you can see in Importance of Being Earnest how he's showing this play to high society people, and the whole play is just kind of completely laughing at them.
And they loved it, and then he's sitting there like, this is amazing.
And it's the same thing with Dorian Gray. Like
Yeah.
you read it, and
It's
nowadays
exactly-
with
yeah.
a modern sensibility, you're like, okay, this is there's a lot going on here.
It's very bobbed and like.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
But-
he was not a happy camper with British society.
No,
in
he
general.
wasn't.
Yeah, no, it's great. Like I think when I was sitting down to write these notes for the interview, I was kind of like I don't really know where to start. But I think one of the things that I kind of wanted, I don't know if this was intentional that you put in there or not, but one of the things I really got from the book was this sense of like, and I think this is, largely true of a lot of young adult fiction. There tends to be, writing, we call it a controlling theme, but for anyone who's unindoctrinated, it's like the sort of the takeaway of the lesson, or the
Sure.
kind of the overall thematic thing that's there. When I finished Boone Shepard, I wasn't like, oh, okay, that was the obvious meaning. I was just like, okay, I want to read more, and also, I kind of was like, I want to read more, but I also just don't want to leave yet. Like, I'm not ready to
Cool.
go.
That's good. That's a really good feeling.
And that was what I took away, and I was like, that's awesome. That a book that is fun, like it's relaxing, it's enjoyable. So let's just start with, so I want to talk about Boone, but as, so he reminds me of a mix of like Tintin, Indiana Jones. There's like a bit of, and this is not this is a compliment, a bit of like Anakin from Star Wars, where like I was thinking particularly that scene where Obi-Wan, they're in the speeder, and they're pursuing the bounty hunter, and Anakin just whoops out of the speeder,
Yeah, sure, sure.
and Obi-Wan's like, God, he's done that again, like he's that kind of thing, not
Yeah.
like just that sort of genius but thoughtless action that puts him in danger.
There's a whole thing with him where because like Boone Shepard, in my mind, he's not a particularly intelligent character. He doesn't think ahead. He doesn't plan ahead. He's not a strategist.
He's a doer.
He's a doer. And there's one moment like in the second book which I love, because to me the moment is the moment that defines him as a character.
Yeah.
Where basically he has more or less defeated the villain of the second book.
Yeah.
And the villain kind of rides off on horseback into the desert. And Boone chases her on horseback.
Yeah.
And he's kind of chasing after her, and he's got no plan. He's got no idea of what he's going to do. He's got no nothing. And the whole kind of, I guess the central theme of the second book is, I mean, obviously in the first book, his whole dark past and everything gets resolved. But coming to the second book, there's sort of a question hanging over the whole second book, which is, okay, so I've lived for so long being bound by this secret I've got and this trauma, and now it's done. I mean, I guess,
What next?
Marby's adventure. What now? Who am I after this? Like, and his whole question in the second book is, who am I?
Yeah.
And there's this moment where he rides after this villain, and she kind of turns around, she pulls a gun on him.
Yeah.
And it's framed by the expanse of the desert, it's sunset, it's very, very cinematic, very Western, and she's kind of got a gun aimed at him, she's like, turn away and go back or I will kill you.
Yep.
And he's like, I'm not going to do that. And she goes, what's your plan? What are you going to do? What rabbit are you going to pull out of the hat to stop me? And he goes, nothing. He goes, I've got nothing. He goes, all I'm going to do is keep chasing you. And that's the moment where he's like, because that's the person I am.
Yeah,
It's like,
okay.
I will do whatever I can to stop the bad guy. And yeah, it's the moment where he's just like, he honestly says to her, I've got nothing.
Yeah.
He goes, if you turn around and ride away, I will keep coming after you. If you shoot me, then I guess I'm going to die, but at least I'll know I died doing the right thing.
So you have to shoot me.
So you're going to have to shoot me.
Yeah.
And she shoots him through the hand. And for the rest of the series, he's got a hole in his hand.
Oh, nice.
Which just kind of keeps becoming a running joke.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of cool. There's some stuff like that. One of my favorite running, it's not necessarily a joke, but in Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, which is like a 14 series, like it's 14 books. One of the main character gets his hand burned by magical fire in the second book.
Yeah.
And so the rest of the series, it like slowly heals over like 13 books, and that's just kind of nice little touchstone. So I always love stuff like that, where it's just like a little touch.
Yeah,
you know?
no, it's good fun. And I mean, he does get more and more battered and sort of destroyed as the series goes on in different ways, which is always fun. Put your character through the ringer.
Yeah.
So out of interest, what did you think of Marbia and Promethea as characters?
So Promethea, this is not a good thing to admit. Promethea, I was like, that reminds me of Gabe a lot in person.
Yeah, right.
Just our interactions. But also, I was like, I can really identify with Promethea. She's such a dick, and I'm such a dick as well.
Yeah,
So I really enjoyed it. She
There's a
was
bit-
so fun.
I love her. Promethea Peters is
Fucking hilarious.
my
as well.
favorite character I've ever written.
So funny.
Like, I love her so much.
Yeah.
She's the character who just comes in and she writes herself. She comes in and she writes, she pretty much, I had a really, somebody read the book before it went into publication and made a point that kind of made me sit back and I was like, oh, that's right, but there's more to it. And that point was that she basically said, she was like, do you think you Gwen Stacy'd Marbia?
Do you think?
Like you
what
killed
do you mean?
off the female, you killed off the girlfriend to motivate the main character.
Oh.
Which is, something that happens to female characters a lot.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Shit, did I? You
I
were
was
like,
like, shit,
did I?
did I? But I mean, And I did think about it, and I suppose like it's tricky because I personally think that, you know, a book should stand by itself, even though obviously it's part of a series, there's more coming. I don't want to sort of rely on me explaining myself in interviews or like what's going to happen in later books to justify what may very well be a decent flaw in the first book. I mean, Marvia had to die to galvanize the plot. But
And also,
it
I'm
would
still
have
up.
been the same if Boone was a female character and Marvia was a man.
And I'm still upset with you for doing it, but yes.
But there's more to it. That's all
yeah,
I
I'm
can
still
say is-
upset with you though.
Yeah.
I won't forgive
there's-
you, but I'll take your word for it.
It was actually that's a really tough scene to write. But
You think?
there's a
Tough
lot
to
more.
read, Jesus.
Good. That's good. I want to hear that.
I mean, you know, it's talking about the Gwen Stacy thing in the comics. When it happens, it's heartbreaking. That in the comic book, it's just agonizing. Problem is, in the film, it was surrounded by other not so good stuff.
Explosive
Just,
CGI and colors and
too many
whatever.
villains and a whole bunch of weird
I didn't even watch that film. I
It
saw
was-
the first one. I was like, that's enough Spider-Man.
We saw
for
it
me.
at a pre-screening for free, and we walked out and I went, "Thank God we didn't pay for it."
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess like it was because it's funny with characters like Marvia and Promethea, both of whom I guess. So, and somebody else made the point of saying they were too similar, and I was like, no, they're not. Marvia's like enigmatic and reserved and kind of quite serious, and Promethea's goofy and loudmouthed and a bit of a dickhead.
She never knows when to shut up.
She never knows when to shut up.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I mean, like, because I mean, have you ever read that article, I Hate Strong Female Characters?
No.
It's great. It's written by this really intelligent female
Yeah,
writer who
right.
basically breaks down the strong female character archetype, which is like, the butt-kicking princess who knows kung fu and is an ace shot and always has a witty comeback for everything and always punches the guys in the face. And it's like, and she basically, the argument was that that's male writers overcorrecting. That's male writers being like, we want to prove our feminist credentials by creating strong female characters.
You
but
go
it's
a little
like,
too
but
far.
you would never call a good male character a strong. You wouldn't really call Batman a strong male character. I mean, I guess he is, but like he's more than that. He's tortured.
Well, he's a orphan.
Exactly.
Kid.
There's more you can say than strong.
Yes.
And with Promethea, it was like, Promethea is capable.'s an ace shot. She's probably. But what I like about Promethea is the fact that she is a strong female character in that she's she's sort of strong personality wise.
But I would say
physically capable.
She's strong,
but she's also
character-wise.
horribly flawed.
Yeah,
Like she's arrogant. She's loudmouth. She's probably more capable than Boone, but not by much. Like, not really.
And there are other. It balances itself out. You know, the idea of strong female characters. The problem with that is that people are strong, sure, but they're also weak.
Exactly.
So you have to have
And
both sides.
They've got to have
you know.
vulnerabilities. And Promethea and Marvia, I think, both have. So, I mean, look, I don't know. I sort of think that, I mean, if anybody accusing sort of the Marvia thing of being Gwen Stacy, I was like, well, I mean, it's not like I've killed off the only dynamic female character in the story, because you've got Promethea as well, who, personally, if I was to toss a coin between Marvia and Promethea as a character I want to spend time with, it'd be Promethea.
Yeah,
but
'cause she's
I
so
love
fun.
Marvia too. But Promethea is a lot of fun to write, and also like Promethea. I'm sorry to people, because there will be people who hate her. She's not going anywhere. She's she's staying the course. She's going all the way through. She's got a lot of development and a lot of learning to do.
Yep.
And her and Boone sort of learn together, and I think the arc of the story is the two of them learning from each other and getting better because of each other.
Which is what people do, you know?
Which is what people do, and they sort of grow together as friends and partners, and it's so no, I mean, like I was, see, the Gwen Stacy thing is, it's tricky because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking,
did I do it?
did I?
Did I say
And
what happened?
it's
It's tough because
it's
like
fair, but it kind of had to happen. That doesn't mean that it's good that it did happen. I mean, obviously it's a trend, but like, yeah.
I guess it's a case of like there were other ways you could have done it, but none that would have felt like
Exactly.
like it feels like it works in this. And you know, the fact that you brought that up and that hadn't even occurred to me, because I'm still upset about the fact that she's dead.
Yeah, cool. Good.
I'm still not cool with it, and I don't know if I'm ever going to speak to you again. But like,
No, fair enough.
yeah, look, that's it. Friendship over.
It's done.
No. But yeah, it didn't occur to me. So
No, cool.
people that say that, I think that's it's a thing that people say now a lot, and people are just going to keep saying it until you know what I mean.
It's
This might be one of those things.
Yeah. Oh, well, look, it is what it is. I mean, like, yeah, I don't know. I guess like for people who do feel that way, assuming you didn't hate the book enough to not read the next ones, there is more to Marvia's story. There's more to come. It's a 4-book series, and I think one of the funniest things that originally, not funny, but like just strange, is that it, talking about, as we mentioned before, kind of stories organically going the way they want to go.
Yeah, they grow. Sure.
You know, the Boone Shepard series was originally meant to be very episodic. Like, everyone was meant to be sort of a different adventure, sort of completely standalone thing. As the series went on, it actually turned out to be very serialized. Like, every book kind of continues from where the previous one ended. And things from the first book, like Babel, Darius, elements like those characters and plot points are still going concerns by the end of the series. Like they don't really go away. Every story is different. Every adventure is different. It's not like it's one adventure broken up.
Yeah.
Every book has a climax resolution, a story it's telling that wraps up.
There's sort of the...
But yeah, there are threads. The Babel thread, I mean, for a start, there are certain leftover questions. Like, I mean, the second book will answer the question of, who was the mysterious woman in Draculius's basement? Because there was a voice of a woman in there and she blew up the lab. Who was her? There's an answer to that question.
Oh, okay.
Secondly, like, where was Darius getting his money from? That's probably a question nobody thought to ask, but that question is answered.
See, often those are the most interesting ones, because you're like, shit, why, hang on, why didn't I ask?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions I don't think people would ask that will get answered in the second book, like that, and also, because, in the first part where Huxley talks about Couchman Frame, the journalist having this mysterious piece of knowledge and having, like, going on this trek into Scotch Mountains and disappearing, who told him about that? That's another question that also does get answered.
What? Yeah, okay.
And all of that
all right.
is... So, I mean, I don't know if it's too much sort of clinging to past events, but I think it really effectively sort of... I think anyway at this point, he says, with nobody else having read it. But I think it does enrich... I think the first book...
Well, it makes the world...
Look, the 4 books are very much one story together.
Yeah.
And I think it's tricky because... I mean, yeah, again, come back to Wednesday's thing. Like, stuff like that, it's tricky when it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I think the fact is, it's part of a series. I think it should tell a complete, satisfying, enjoyable story in and of itself.
Yeah.
But, yeah, there's a lot of things, particularly from the first book, that do pay off down the line. There are setups. You've already met the main villain of the whole series in this book, and it's not who you think it is.
Oh, no.
You've met the person who will be the final showdown, the final book, and it's not who you think it is.
See, that, to me, is... I always love that stuff. There's one of the best one of the best young adult fiction series. I've been doing some research lately. And a friend of mine recommended Skullduggery Pleasant, which is a sort of...
I read the first 2. I really enjoyed them.
Really fun. And they've gone on, and I think they've finished. I'm not sure.
There's like 10 of them now or something.
Yeah, there's a lot. But it turns out that the main character ends up becoming the villain of the series.
Oh, right.
And it's genius. Like, it's this genius moment. Because they know it's coming for a few books. Like, she's going to bring the apocalypse or whatever. They learn that. And the rest of the books is them trying to prevent it, and then ultimately causing it. And it's this really interesting sort of... But each book has, a villain of the week, if you want to call it that, that they have to go and solve. But each time it brings them closer to this thing that is coming. So I think that serialization works so well.
There's a different villain. I mean, the first Boone Shepard book has 2 villains, so 2 for the price of 1.
That's true.
The second, third, and fourth, they all have their own villain.
Yeah.
But each of those villains, they all tie together. Like, the villain in the third book, for example, is a character who has had nothing to do with... I'm going to try to say it's the most roundabout, non-spoilery way possible.
Yeah.
But he's a character who's had nothing to do with the events we've already seen. Until he does. Because time travel.
Oh, yeah.
So,
no, fair enough. No. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's that, and so it all does... So I want it to be the kind of series where when you put down the... hopefully, fingers crossed, we get to the 4th book. I want it to be the kind of thing where you get to the point where you put down the 4th book, and if you were to go back and reread the whole series from start to finish, there are moments I can point to where if you... fingers crossed, if people like the books, there are moments where if you read the first book again, I can point to, I think, probably 3 or 4 different moments in the first book where you will read it and you'll go... Oh,
yeah, and that stuff is...
It was the beauty of knowing the whole overall arc of the story when I went into it, was being able to plant seeds. And this is me tooting my own horn here, but some of them are so subtle, there is no way you will pick up... There are certain things in there that there's no way in hell you will pick up on that being of any significance... Until you've read the final book.
Which is great. Like, that stuff is... That's what makes a lot of series so enjoyable, is because it rewards you for reading.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm hoping it does in the end.
That's what you want. Like, when you finish a book, you want to feel like it was worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think... I think this series will in the end.
You're like, fingers crossed?
I hope. I don't know. It does a lot of, like... It sort of, like, flies in the face of a lot of the rules of young adult fiction in some ways, particularly as it goes on, but
Well, some of the most successful... I think, one of the things that I think really applies to Boone Shepard as an idea is, like... Once you know the rules, that's when you're allowed to know which ones to break.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Because that's why some books are so amazing. Like, if you look at, I always talk about The Name of the Wind, so Patrick Rothfuss.
Yeah.
Who is, I think, he might be my all-time favorite writer ever. his book does not structurally work. It shouldn't work. It just shouldn't. There's no way it would, but it's perfect. Because he knows exactly which structural rules to break. And Boone Shepard does that, You would say to yourself, oh, well, you can't actually have a flashback in the middle of your book.
Yeah.
But then you do, and it works because you know why you're breaking it, and the reason makes sense in the context
And that's why,
of
like,
the book.
I think one thing I learned from film school, because particularly going in at the start, I was like, oh no, I don't want to do what you tell me. I want to break all the rules. I don't care.
I'm a rebel.
If you're going to break the rules,
Yeah.
rules are in place for a reason, generally speaking, because it's a tried and true formula, and that sounds like a bit safe.
Yeah.
And of course, if you like, the rebel screenwriter in me wants to be like, oh no, I break all the rules. But the thing is, the smarter thing is to look at it like, why are you going to break the rules?
You gotta have a real
why are you
reason.
breaking them? And with Boone Shepard, with the extended flashback in the middle of the first book, which is so not kosher.
Yeah.
That is so not what you're meant to do.
Yeah.
And my screenwriting tutors would probably kick me up and down if they read that. But the fact of it is, I know why I did it.
Yes.
And I can justify it. And I also know how I approached it to try to get around that being a problem.
Yeah, because you know what the problem is.
I think it works.
I think it did as well.
We'll see.
We'll see. If it turns out everyone hates it, then
well, hey, look, whatever.
that's a lesson in itself.
Not much
though.
I can do. Again, as
sometimes
we said at the start, it's gone out in the world. It belongs to other people now, and once it's yours,
also,
you can hate it and kick it around all you like. Use it for toilet paper if you want to.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you've paid the money for it, and I can't afford to reimburse you $20.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, what ply is your book? How many?
I don't know. I should know.
You should find out. Yeah.
Facts I should be aware of.
That should be on the back actually, on the dust jacket.
Just, and
just
like maybe have like a convenient hole in the top corner, like sticking the hook in the
Oh,
toilet.
so you can put but then you need that's not a bad idea.
Man, it could make life more easy.
Yeah. But one of the things that to put it in perspective, that that idea of a flashback being in the middle of a book, in Stephen King's Dark Tower series, I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I know. I've been meaning to read it for ages, but again, I'm mired in the Wheel of Time right now.
Oh
and
yeah, I'll see you in 5 years. There's an entire book of that. It's the longest book of the eight book series. I think it's 8 books. It might be 7. I'm not sure. There's an entire book. The 4th one is almost the whole thing is a flashback, pretty much.
Right.
And it's the longest book. Like, it's this thick. I've just gestured, but it's amazingly long. But it's all flashback. And you should never do that. Like,
no,
ever.
you shouldn't do that.
But it works so well because he knows why he's doing it, and it's one of the better books of the series.
See, that's the thing. I mean, like, taking risks like that is. I mean, look at what Game of Thrones did. The Song of Ice and Fire series in the 4th and 5th book, where instead of dividing the narrative chronologically, they divided geographically.
Geographically, yeah.
So pretty much it was like, in the 4th book, you got what was going on with certain characters in certain parts of the world, and then the 5th book, you got what's going on with other characters.
Yes.
In theory, it's interesting, but I don't think you can justify it. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, it's an interesting take, but again,
why? What do you bring?
You're sort of ignoring the fact that these are really thick books, and basically you're asking people to wait a whole book until they can see their favorite characters again. Point A. And point B, if you were reading the books as they came out, there's a 5-year wait between books. I mean, you imagine that you read the 3rd book.
Yeah.
It took you 10 years to find out what happened to Tyrion or Jon Snow or Daenerys.
Yeah.
Because you don't see them in the 4th book.
Which is, like, I think, there's a time and a place to take risks like that, but it has to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to be 110% sure.
And I saw a really good comedy show recently. It was Neil Kolhatkar. He's an internet comedian, does that Australia in 2 minutes video. Look, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of his YouTube stuff. I mean, I liked it enough to go and see his comedy show, obviously.
Yeah.
But I went and saw his comedy show, and basically what I loved about it was that it was really fleet and really fast.
Yes.
So look, some moments weren't as funny as others. They were, other audience members really liked them, but there were moments I was like, oh yeah, whatever, get on with it. But what I liked about it was the fact that basically it was like, if you don't like this, in 2 minutes there'll be another thing. And I kind of tried to have that with Boone Shepard, where it's like, if you get into the flashback stuff, sitting there being like, oh, I don't really want the flashbacks. It's like, give it 50 pages and you'll be out of there. 50 pages and you'll be back to the other stuff.
It does feel like that there's something for everyone,
Yeah, which, I mean, and that's the tricky thing, like, when it came to selling this was, because we've obviously sold it as young adult, but it kind of breaks one of sort of the fundamental rules of young adult fiction, which is that the main character is an adult. Like, but I mean, like, in my mind, it's that Indiana Jones, Doctor Who thing where Star Wars, even, where the stories are made for kids and appeal to kids, and the characters are not children. But that's kind of why I wanted to keep his age indeterminate. Like with, I mean, his age, you can actually find out his age in there because the dates are in there. He's 20.
Yeah,
but
it feels like it. He feels young.
Yeah, and that's kind of
which is kind of the point.
But I think it's. And yeah, it's tricky because, like, in my mind, I want it to be one of those things that can be enjoyed by any age. I want it to be one of those things where it's like, and like you said at the start with the Easter eggs and everything,
Yeah.
it's something that a kid can read and like, something like for the fun adventure and the colourful characters, something an adult can read and like for the little in-jokes and the references and the cameos of famous people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the problem is, like, I mean, you pitch that to a publishing house and you say, they're like, who's it for? It's like, it's for everyone. And the first thing you get taught at film school, because so many writers, myself included, try to say, oh, my film's for everyone. And they're like, if it's for everyone, it's for no one.
Yep.
Or when they ask about your theme, what's your theme? Oh, it's about everything. It's about everything. It's about nothing.
Yeah,
Like,
that
no
means...
and like to me, it's like, yeah, it's for that age. It's the kind of, I basically wrote the kind of book I would have loved when I was 13.
Yeah.
Is sort of what I'm.
It does. No, that's I get what you mean. Like it's the kind of thing that at the same age I would have been like, this is sick. You know, because that's the kind of thing I was reading. You know, that was the skullduggery pleasance of the time. You know,
and I wanted it to be. And I want to keep like a bit of darkness to it too, even though like the general tone is kind of light and frothy. Like, I mean, the main plot is actually kind of based on the Book of Exodus.
Yeah.
Prince of Egypt really is I've never read the Book of Exodus, but like, you know, the whole thing of
It's
like,
one of the better parts of the Bible.
Yeah, well, the Prince of Egypt is one of the better films that's come from the Bible, if not the best.
I don't know.
love that film.
I don't know. Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's a good time.
Yeah.
Great songs.
Jesus Christ Superstar, I do love.
It's all right.
But
Passion of the Christ, 10 out of 10.
yeah, I mean, think about Prince of Egypt. I think I actually got the idea for the bulk of this story listening to the plague song from the Prince of Egypt, where it's Moses and Ramses like singing across, you know, once I called you brother, like, you know, and it's basically, that was where the Boone and Darius dynamic came from.
Okay,
like
yeah.
two brothers who kind of get forced back into conflict with each other, and then one basically is trying to release these people the other one has prisoner, and basically it's the plot of Prince of Egypt, just with a time-traveling journalist and his little brother who's 40 years older than him.
I'm fairly sure that, though I'm no copyright expert, I'm fairly sure the statute of copyright has run out on the Bible.
I think so. I think I'm probably safe,
just-
yeah?
It's a bit old. It's a bit outdated.
Just God comes in, slaps down some papers, you've been served.
Yeah, he's
Walks
like,
out.
look, he's like, I don't know how to say this, but where are my royalties? That's, I mean, look, it's a risk you gotta run.
Moses comes hobbling into the studio right now and is like, right now. Like, puts down some,
With
like,
a stick.
puts down 2 stone slabs.
Yeah, he's like, look, I use stone. It's olden days. Where's my money?
Yeah, pretty much.
You hand him a $20 note. It's like, I don't know what this.
This is all
what
like, this is from a book that
Where
someone...
can I exchange this for a goat?
Yeah,
I imagine
pretty
that's how
much.
you bought books back in the day.
Oh, almost.
I'm no
definitely. Or
historian.
stone slabs.
I mean,
or
I still
whatever they
do.
used.
That was weird. I took a goat to the book launch last night, and they
didn't accept it.
It was weird.
Why
Like,
wouldn't they do that?
I don't know, especially for Boone Shepard. Like,
Come
it just
on,
felt
man.
it felt like a fair exchange. I don't know what I was.
Theme, it makes sense. Hey, if you gave me a goat for the book, I'd give you a book.
Well, you
because
gave me but you
I
also
want a
gave me a
goat.
book. You want a
Who doesn't
goat, and I want a
goat?
book.
Like, yeah, exactly.
Goods and services. That's how it works.
Exactly. Supply and demand, I think.
Actually, something in the book that reminded me of a goat. I don't know why I brought this up.
Good.
So goats made me think of animals, which made me think of manatees, which is the best. It's the best and weirdest, and so it's subtle, but it's fucking weird. The manatees thing, like,
It doesn't go away either.
when I read that, I just chuckled. I was like, "What is happening, Gabe? What is happening?"
I've actually got a... Okay, there is actually a reason for the manatee thing,
okay.
but you'll never find out what it is.
Oh,
it's not
okay.
in any of the books.
Is
There
it-
is, in my
oh.
mind, there is a reason, and there's more and more references in the books as it goes on.
Is it
that
the-
hint as to what the manatee thing is? I know canonically why manatees are such a fixture in this universe and why they keep coming up. But you won't ever see. I don't think you'll ever see that story.
Okay.
But I know why. There is a reason.
It's in the brain. Are
it's
we gonna hear it? Or are you hang on to it?
I'm toying with it. I'm not sure if to tell you or not.
Well, here's the thing.
Because I'm not sure. Because I'm just worried if people listen to this now and they're like, and then they're like, when they read the second or third book, you know, if they, you know, hopefully they happen. Like, I'm just worried that they'll read that and be like, oh yeah, come on.
No,
Bert,
you're
whereas
right.
I
You
get
know
what
what?
the manatee thing is?
You know what? Tell me, and then I'll cut it out.
Yeah, right.
I'll cut that out. But that's amazing.
Anyway, there you
that's
go.
there we go. That's the Art for Us exclusive. I can
Yeah.
walk around with that one. That's so good.
You know why the manatee thing.
Yeah,
is
we
what
got
it
the
is.
inside track.
I
That's
might
fantastic.
reveal it one day, but
One day,
for the purposes of
they'll
now-
there'll be like a maybe in years down the track, you know.
Yeah,
it comes
yeah.
out. You write the manatee incident.
the manatee incident.
That's
look,
how you
maybe-
should. Yeah,
Maybe I'll write it
codename manatee
and have it
incident.
on my deathbed. and like have it released after I die.
Oh, you do like it's your manuscript that comes out when
Because
you're
I'm
dead.
pretty sure, like, if they take off well enough and stuff, and if people read them, people are like, "What the hell is the manatee thing?"
Yeah. And when you're the king of writers, which is presumably what you're going for.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah.
You're going for the throne. It's
that's
it's like the rap game. Like
Yeah.
Drake's on the throne at the moment, but you're coming.
Same as like the Elvis element from earlier.
It's the same thing, yeah.
Same deal.
Just except for writers. So it's
Yes.
yeah, it's in a darkened room. It's a nice writing desk, but there's a throne.
It's a bottle of scotch.
Yeah, so when you're the king of writers, maybe when you die, like that's in your will, you're like, you have to publish this book. Can you do that? Is that a thing you can do? I think it is. Because David Bell dropped my record when I die. I feel like you can.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's legally binding though. I don't think you can be like, publisher, when I die, you write that into every contract for any book you ever write from now on.
You must publish.
You
got
to publish it when I'm dead.
Thing.
Yeah.
Oh well. Anyway, look, maybe not. I'll see. I might expose it on a whim sometime. But I think for now, I want to keep it close.
It'd
to
be
my
a
chest.
fun little side.
I also just like the idea that it gradually drives people insane the more and more they read.
I feel like it would
series
because it's one of those like non sequitur things that just is there.
There's a great bit. It's one of my favorite bits in the third book where Boone and Prometheus are investigating a murder, and they track the murder to this really, really dodgy part of like the London criminal underworld.
Yeah.
And it's like hidden beneath King's Cross Station, and it's like this secret thing that requires like a password and like the right identities to get in. And Boone and Prometheus like go through hell to smuggle themselves into what they think is like a secret society meeting.
Oh boy.
And it turns out that it's Avery Arbogast, the American from the start of the first book, has opened up a manatee fighting ring.
What?
And he's got all of like London's hardened criminals around him, and basically in the middle of this arena is a pool with like 2 caged manatees on either ends.
That's amazing.
And everyone's put like all this money on the
manatees
manatees fighting.
Do they fight?
No, because he lets the manatees out and they just bob in the water.
No, I
because
mean,
they're
well,
manatees.
yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I didn't think they fought.
Well, yeah, it all turns hairy very quickly because Avery Arbogast is standing there and the manatees are let out of the cages. And Avery's like, and everyone's like cheering and like, ready for blood.
And he's like,
Boone's kind of sitting there being like, Avery, what have you done? What have you done? What are
like,
you doing?
He's like, you didn't Google manatees, did you?
No, you didn't. And then Avery's like, fight!
Go
Fight! And
do
the
it.
manatees just bob there because they're manatees.
And it'd be like cat fighting. You put 2 cats in a ring and they just lie down and sleep. You're like,
Yeah, exactly.
That was less exciting than I'd hoped.
So of course it turns into a riot.
No, it would. That's
But
good.
no, manatees will
That's
return.
amazing.
The manatees will return. If I can promise you one thing about the sequels, it's manatees.
Boone's gone, Prometheus gone, manatees though.
The manatees will
It's actually the
remain.
rest of the series is about manatee Shepard.
Yes, that's
When
it.
when
That's,
Boone becomes a manatee.
Yes,
That's
or
the secret.
Or Boone and Prometheus adopt a manatee.
Just
And-
like where would you? It'd be hard to keep like in a bathtub, I guess.
I suppose they're mammals though.
They get
so-
pretty big. Yeah, but they need water, don't
Yeah,
don't
they do.
they?
I don't
Do
know.
they?
I don't know how
What?
manatees work.
How do?
I wish I did.
I feel like that's probably what
It's irresponsible of me as a proponent of manatees.
Yeah.
Who shares them? Who spreads them all throughout my
Yeah.
work. I really should have a greater understanding of the physiology of manatees.
Yeah, you're
I
driving.
really
you're
should.
driving that car without a seatbelt on.
I
is what
really
you're
am.
doing.
It's ridiculous.
It's the only way to drive a manly
I'm
car.
playing a dangerous game.
It's a dangerous
here.
game. It's how you get burned. So, okay, Prometheus, right? We
Yeah.
talked about it before. She's my favorite character.
Good.
She's just such a dick, but I love it. She reminds me of when I was much younger and I was sort of growing up reading young adult fiction, and then obviously adult fiction when I was way too young, as is always the way with most writers.
Yeah, of course.
There's a character in, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but the Edge Chronicles, which is
No, I'm not.
Sky Pirates. It's very fun. It's for kids, but it's super dark at times.
Cool.
There's sword fighting, there's guns, death. It's
all the good stuff.
Yeah, there's some really violent like character. Someone gets dismembered at one point.
Awesome.
Like it's really dark.
Awesome.
Very fun. And there's a character in that. One of the main characters of a later one, set sort of many years after the previous ones, and it's like a steampunk version of the world. And the main character in that, the minute that I started reading Prometheus, I was like, oh my god, that's like it just. I had like one of those moments where I suddenly flashed back to
awesome.
when I was reading
Good.
this book as a kid, and I have this memory of like sitting there reading it at the top of my hill from where I live, because there's a really nice sort of spot when I was growing up, and I like flashed back immediately when I was reading it in your living room. I was like, oh my god, I remember that moment like so clearly and vividly.
That's brilliant.
And that was just one of those moments where I was like, yeah. I'm not sure what that says about the book, but I just thought that was worth sharing because that was something.
No, that's awesome. That's a really cool thing to know.
Yeah.
She's
it was
just
lovely.
and she does. I mean, for people who do find her, a bit too much. I mean, it's funny because I think maybe I found her a bit much because you notice she kind of disappears for huge swathes of this book.
I think that makes her
And it's-
work, though.
Yeah, and
She's
but
also that
people
kind of
do
a-
say that like when she comes back, the moments where like she comes back in the tank
Yeah.
or comes and saves him from Draculius at the end are sort of almost punch the air moments where you're like, oh, Prometheus back.
Yeah,
and
you
the
do.
energy
You're
kind
like,
of lifts
yeah,
again,
you know.
which is good. That's kind of what I was going for with
She's
it.
the
But
she's kind of like Poe Dameron.
yeah, that's kind of
Because
what,
he'd be a bit
except
much if he was
snarkier.
Yes,
It's
well,
much snarkier.
but in the
Poe
sense
Dameron.
that when he comes, you're like, oh, Poe's he's back. He's
Yeah,
doing it.
yeah.
You know.
And that's kind of, but I mean, she definitely softens as they go on, but she doesn't stop being Promethea.
I'm excited
Put it
to
that way.
see where she ends up
You'll
going.
see more depth to her. You
Yeah.
definitely see more of what makes her tick and why she is the way she is. You do get a bit of her backstory and stuff in, I think, the third book, and like you get a lot more sort of what her overall motivations are and kind of what her insecurities and stuff are in the second book. But those are glimmers.
Yeah.
Apart from that, she is always Promethea Peters.
Do you
She
get?
is-
I don't know if this is. Tell me if this is true for you when you write a character, because I've always found this true when I meet people in real life as well as when I'm writing characters, that you always start off with like a stereotype, or you have like a bunch of things that make a stereotype of a person, because that's how you meet people.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, you're tall. Like, say when I met you, I was like, you're really tall. Why are you so tall? That
I'm
was the
tall.
first thing I
I'm tall,
noticed,
man.
because I'd heard your voice on the podcast. I was like, why is he so tall? Like, what is going on? Like. And then I was like, okay, he's tall, he's a writer, and then I get that bits of information, I add that to your appearance, I'm like, okay, there's my stereotype for Gabe.
Sure.
And then when I get to know you more, I start to add detail. I add backstory, you know, when you're
All
writing
of
a
that,
character,
yeah,
you
yeah.
start to add that stuff. You're like, okay, backstory, motivation, personality, speech patterns, traits, you know, other habits. And then eventually you have a whole character.
Yeah.
You know, you get like parents, you get all this other stuff that surrounds it, and that's how you get to know a person. It's often how you get to know characters as well, because you have to start somewhere. So when you are creating a character, for instance, do you find that's how you
That's
start?
exactly how I do it. Because, you know, with Promethea, I mean, in the very, very first high school drafts, Promethea, back in those like 3 original stories I wrote back in school, the idea was that every story, because I was very influenced by Doctor Who to a fault, the idea was that every story Boone would have like a different female companion sort of going on his adventures. Not a romantic one, but just like, you know.
Yeah.
And
Like old
Promethea
school
was just
Doctor
sort
Who.
of a... Back then, Promethea Peters was literally... She was nothing like the character she ended up being in this. She was just sort of a character who was there.
Yeah.
When I rewrote it, I was like, I actually want her to be different. And I was like, what if I just make her... Well, pretty much the character you met, like really snarky. And at first
Yeah.
I was like, I just want her to be a scene stealer. I want to have the best lines, really snarky, really immature, horrible temper.
Oh, yeah.
Like just, you know, no sense of decorum, really doesn't care about anyone else, kind of selfish, kind of loudmouth,
Yeah.
kind of delights in belittling and making Boone miserable.
Oh, yes.
And that
Enjoys
was
when
sort of-
he's suffering.
Yeah, and then I thought, but of course, in the end, she'll come true and she'll be a hero and she'll
Yeah.
sort of help save the day. And that was kind of her, I guess, her in the first book. And then in the second book, there was a scene I write between Boone and Promethea where, you know, she kind of opens up a bit, and I was like, that kind of was a moment, a real sort of gateway opening moment for me where I was like, oh, okay, I actually understand a lot more about you now. And when I came to writing I think it was the third book, I originally had this whole approach where Promethea's backstory was going to be a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And her backstory actually got, as I was developing it, and it was going to be a huge fixture in the book, actually got quite dark. Like quite, not dark, not dark in the way Boone's is, where it's like people sort of die horribly and stuff like that, and, you know, there's guns and vampires and stuff like that, but dark in a more real kind of just...
Darker than you'd think.
Yeah, dark, just kind of like you'd hear that and you'd be like, oh, that's a bit grim. But like it's not in like a horrible, over the top misery porn way, but just her backstory is a bit... just-
Real, like dark realistically.
yeah.
Is that...
And
yeah.
basically, in my mind, that relationship... not that relationship, but rather that backstory stayed as part, even though it didn't make it into the books.
Yeah.
You get a glimmer of it. You sort of find out a little bit about kind of what went on.
Yeah. Okay.
But it definitely, yeah, it's still in my mind. That's part of who she is. In my mind,
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
part of sort of that is canon. That's head canon. That's
Yeah.
why Prometheus is the way she is. That's all in my head, and that all came back from sort of writing this stuff and realizing I wasn't going to use it because there was no place for it in the story. But it's still sort of there, and it all kind of
I always
helps
think
shape this overall idea of who Promethea Peters is.
I think that
And
really
the same with Boone and
informs
everyone else.
That informs like the. I mean, so one of there are two ways I think you can create characters, and one of them is really good, and one of them is what George R. R. Martin started to do after a while, where like not to. I don't. A lot of shade being thrown at George R. R. Martin in this podcast.
No, I think he's a genius.
Yeah, he's great. But
Yeah.
we are, shot. We're looking at you. We know you're there, George.
Yeah,
We
he's
shoot- pew, pew.
sitting here listening, crying, like the
Yeah.
razor hovering above his wrist.
Yeah, he's like, this is too much. This is if you're listening, George, I'm sorry. But so like when you create a character, you have those unspoken things, the silences that make them feel like a real person.
Yeah,
sure. The stuff that we don't tell. But someone once said to me that every person and every character, so every person and every good character has some secret that they keep that no one else knows about. And you have to know it as a writer to make the character realized, It has to be something that they hold so close and secret that no one else knows, and that makes them real and realized, And often it's a secret that they tell themselves that isn't true.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
often the way. So it's a truth that they believe about the world that is fundamentally not true. And that's where catharsis comes from, is when you realize those things aren't true and you reset your worldview. But one of the things that George R. R. Martin started doing instead of that, because he had so many characters, is he was like, okay, I need a character in this location to do this thing. So then he would pull out his family trees, and he would get his family trees, and he would, go down the family trees and be like, okay, these two people had a baby, and it's this guy who lives in this place. And that's how he built characters, is from these family trees. Which sounds, in theory, like a good idea, because you have like a set of parents and a location and stuff.
Yeah, but it's actually something I call chessboard writing, which
Yes.
is something when, particularly coming into writing the second Boone Shepard book, which was the hardest book to write, when I started writing it and I didn't really know what the plot was going to be, and I kind of looked at it and I was like, okay. And I did the same thing when I first tried to write a sequel to Windmills, when I sort of looked at it and I was like, okay, so what's the layout of my chessboard? What pieces do I have right now?
Yeah.
So character A is at this point, character B is at this point. Like basically had a look through, saw what were all the pieces who were on the board at that time.
Yep.
Who are the characters who are in play? Who are the minor characters who have been established that I can do more with? Who are the characters who have been mentioned?
Yep.
Who are these people and what can I do with
get
them?
the lay of the
Which
land.
I actually think, for me anyway, that's the wrong way to write, because to me, if you're continuing something, it shouldn't be a matter of where are my pieces and how can I play them against each other to make it entertaining, because then you actually are making a story up. It's not organically what the organic next part of the story is.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you're going to write a sequel, it should be because you're like, of course, that's what happens next. Of course, yeah, now I understand how it sort of continues.
Yeah, like
Because it all should make sense. It should just come to you.
the best moments for me when I'm writing a sequel of anything. And I've been writing I'm actually writing the third volume in this stupidly long series I've been working on.
Yeah, sure.
I was like, it'll be a brief book. It's 200,000 words. Anyway, but so I'm writing this, and my favorite parts are when I'm writing a scene, and I'm like, okay, they're at a dock or something, and a character's gonna come up to them, and they're gonna have an interaction, and I go, and I start writing it, and I'm like, oh my god, that's this person from earlier, from the first book.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you like,
cool.
it just happens, and you're like, what? That's amazing, and you get excited, and you're like, oh, it's them again, and they kind of appear.
Yeah,
and
which is always very good.
Yeah, and I always feel like it lacks that flair if you've planned for them to come back in that scene.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a moment writing my play Beyond Babylon where, I thought it was going to have one ending, then had a different... I'm not going to bother going into it because we've been talking for a really long time. But basically, the ending, it was only in the last moment of the play where I realized what the ending was. And the ending is the best part. The twist at the end is the best part of the play.
Yeah.
The twist is what ties the whole thing together and, lends so much context and weight to everything that's gone beforehand.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there thinking, okay, if I'd actually ended that play the way I intended to end it, and it's the kind of twist where one of the major characters, there are only two major characters in the play.
Yeah.
There are only two characters in the play. One of them is not who you think they are. And
Yeah,
I
okay.
spent the whole time writing that script thinking he was who I thought he was. And at
Ah.
the end, I was like, oh, you're actually not at all. You've been hiding something this whole time.
Okay.
And suddenly it was like, okay, so everything that's written beforehand
Yeah.
was written not with the intention of him revealing this thing about himself at the end.
Yeah.
But...
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
with him, but the thing is, when I went back, I actually saw clues. There were lines he had that I was like,
He was kind of
like-
doing this for me the whole time.
yeah. I was like,
It's weird how that happens,
He knew what he
isn't
was
it?
doing. I was like, I'm just going to leave that there. I'm actually just going to leave that there, and I'm not going to change anything. And again, I actually think that the reason I love that twist, and people still say to me the twist in Beyond Babylon was one of the most, people who saw that play, people have seen plays since then, and I've had twists in there. And I've actually had people been like, oh, even if the play is much more well written, much more crafted than Beyond Babylon, people have been like to me, oh yeah, I prefer Beyond Babylon. I was like, why? And he was like, oh, because the twist was just so good,
Yeah.
because nobody saw it coming.
Well, because
I didn't see it coming.
that's the best. Because, I mean, it's the opposite of the M. Night Shyamalan effect.
Yeah.
Because you're not expecting the twist. That's why it's good.
Yeah.
You know, and like, I mean, his biggest problem is a script writer.
But dude, it's the same as I was saying before. Like, you know, if I'm feeling gripped by the story, the audience is hopefully going to be feeling gripped by the story.
Yeah, they're in it. You know?
That's why, you know, I don't try to write anything that bores me. Like, I try to skip over any boring scenes because I'm like, if I'm bored, the audience is probably going to be bored. If I feel like it's a chore, the audience is probably going to feel like it's a chore. And I mean, those twists. I mean, it's so rare that you get those organic, kick-ass twists that come out of nowhere and change everything. But for me, it's like, well, when that happens, it's like, well, okay, if me as the person writing and creating this story was shocked by it, then the audience sure as hell is going to be shocked by it.
Absolutely. And that, I mean, that again comes from, you don't get that unless you're writing a lot.
Yeah,
because those things happen so rarely, you know. I just finished Mad Men finally. Oh my god! And the last episode of that, there's a moment where two characters, out of nowhere, they suddenly realize they're in love with each other, and at first you're like, hang on, what? And then after a few seconds when they're talking, you're like, they've been in love with each other for years. Like that moment is so, I did not see it coming. Like,
and it's almost rom-com-y, but it kind of works because it feels organic and it doesn't feel engineered.
And because you realize at the same time, you're like, oh my god, they've been in love for years and they didn't know it, and now it should be rom-com-y, but it works. That's because it feels like the script writers were in the room doing their scripts, and they were like, okay, how are we going to end it? And someone went, oh my god, they've been in love for years.
Yes.
And everyone went,
yes.
They have. Like, and that's, you know, getting those moments, they're so amazing.
And that's it. There's like, you know, and Boone Shepard definitely had a couple of those in one of the later books. There's a moment that I was like, oh, of course.
Yeah, like, I get it now.
And it's great. It's probably the most satisfying thing as a writer is having those moments. Like being surprised by your own story. Like, how good is that? That's something that you are basically making up in your head.
And it surprises
can surprise you and shock you and make you gasp in the same way that you want an audience to be surprised and shocked and gasping.
Which makes no sense.
It makes no sense at all, but who cares? It's great.
People don't, they're like, what do you, that's not a, but no, it absolutely happens a lot.
Yeah, it does.
It's great.
And, you know, all you can do is kind of take credit for it and say, yeah, I was smart enough to think of that.
I wasn't. I planned it. Well, somewhere in your brain you did.
Somewhere, I know, but I had no conscious part in that.
None of my training, you know?
You know, anyway, it's good.
All right, well, I think that's probably a good. So, if where can people pick it up? The best place.
Look, at the moment, right now as of recording, I don't know because I don't know what the distributor's done.
Yeah.
Bellfrogbooks.com. Bellfrog Books. Yeah, so you can order an ebook online from bellfrogbooks.com. So you can get an ebook or you can order the physical copy. The distributor at the moment is, as far as it being in bookstores, I mean, it's in Readings, it's in a couple of other stores. I know that it's in quite a few stores I don't know about.
Yeah.
But like, I honestly don't know who's stocking it.
And for all of our stuff, you know, you can hit us up on Patreon, Twitter, all the good stuff. Everything's in the show notes. So thanks as always for having a chat with me.
Thanks for coming down, being at the book launch,
been my pleasure.
My book and giving me a chance to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because like, I mean, it's great for me because I've been sitting on all this stuff for so long. With nobody having read it yet. So actually finally getting the chance to kind of discuss what went into it and what happened and how it sort of came about and where I want to go with this crazy, silly, ridiculous story has been an absolute pleasure. So
it's been awesome, and I'm sure whenever the second book comes out, we'll have to do this again.
Absolutely.
And like the gameplay is super fun. And like because those three things are there, it's exceptionally good.
I could do it in a heartbeat and make millions, but it would feel like just gouging my soul out.
Yeah, Jurassic Park's a little more like DDR.
If Shrek is a fairy tale creature, can he actually own land and want to kick them off? Where did that come from? You have to make a lot of shit up to make good art.
Yeah.
That's just the truth, man.